We're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council. Welcome in particular to our friends and fellow citizens who are watching us on YouTube. There will be an opportunity at the conclusion of this portion of the meeting when you'll be able to tender any questions you may have or comments on any item that was discussed this evening. We'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. We'll call the meeting to order. And before we go to the approval of the agenda, I would like to indulge, if you would indulge me, like to make a note that this is International Women's Day 2022, when we celebrate women in municipal government in particular, and encourage others to become involved. The town of Mahone Bay benefits from the experience and perspective of women who sit on committees of council, as well as two female elected officials, Councillor Alice Burdick and Councillor Penny Carver. The first woman was elected to council in 1982, was Barbara Curry. Then the first and only female mayor elected in Mahone Bay, Virginia Ullman, was elected in 1996. For the 2004 to 2008 council term, citizens were represented by 3 female councillors. Half of the council membership were female. Lila O'Connor, Kathy Schlon-White now, and Virginia Ullman. Other councillors who have joined these auspicious ranks over the years include Donna Conrad, Margaret Henniger, Lynn Henniger for 2 terms, and more recently, councillors Simone Chia-Kangata and Colleen O'Neill. Today, we recognize and thank the women who offered and were chosen to serve the electors of Mahone Bay for the 2024 term, as we mentioned, Councillor Alice Burdick and Councillor Penny Carver. In addition, there are citizens serving on council committees. Susan Maples is on the Cemetery Committee. Catherine McCarron is on both the Planning Advisory Committee and the Plan Mahone Bay Steering Team. Anne McPhail is on the Heritage Advisory Committee. Annette St. Ange, Heritage Advisory Committee, and the Asset Management Committee. Patricia Sharp is on the Asset Management Committee, and Kara Turner is our representative to the South Shore Regional Library Board. Anyone who wants to know more about serving on a committee of council, or running for a seat on town council, or running as the mayor, is encouraged to reach out to town staff, who are happy to chat with you and help you to connect with the resources and information. That particular item that was created by the town clerk in honor of today's event will be entered into the official record of tonight's meeting. And I thank the women who are on council and who have been on council and the contributions that they have made to our town. Thank you very much. With that, Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented or as you would have it amended. Councillor Carver?
Motion to approve the agenda as circulated.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick seconds. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Let's go to the minutes of the regular meeting of February 24th, 2022. What is your wish, Counsel? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, the minutes appeared in order, and I'd move that council approve the minutes of the regular meeting of February 24th, 2022.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now? On the question. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to our correspondence. Correspondence for action items. We have a couple of letters from the Mahone Bay Garden Club and one from the Salt Box Brewing Company. CAO, are you going to speak to these notes or?
I certainly could do. Sorry, I hadn't. As far as the flower baskets go, I think the main thing to reference here is that we have received similar indications from the Mahone Bay Tourism and Chamber of Commerce of an interest in reviving flower baskets throughout the town. So good to call attention to the overlapping requests. As far as this one goes, the specific request from the Garden Club is, I guess, a little bit, maybe there's a value in connecting the two organizations in terms of the Garden Club would be willing to assist and make a donation. I believe that the intention on the Chamber's part is a donation driven program. So I don't know if we want to maybe encourage one party, potentially the Chamber, to head up this project. They've indicated a priority on it.
That would seem to be a solution. And in the Chamber certainly is enthusiastic about reviving the flower basket program. Any other comments? Councillor Feeney and Deputy Mayor.
Mayor, as well, as you know, in consultation with the Chamber, that council and staff has recently had, beautification as an overall theme is probably something we'll want to talk about throughout the budget process. As you know, throughout the festivals in the fall and into the Father Christmas Festival, there were a number of requests for financial support towards under the overall theme beautification. So I think it's also important that we just note these two requests as well through that budget deliberation process, and as we work through that process, find out if there's an opportunity to support the Talking Trees group, the Mahone Bay Garden Club, and other organizations through the grants process as we talk about the overall grant portfolio through the budget deliberations.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Then Councillor Carver.
I guess just building onto that, I was wondering whether we need to direct staff to, even as those organizations do their piece, that staff work on including what we can do within our budgets, so that at least we have a way in which we don't have to litigate. I'm trying to look for the right word. Litigate the issue when it comes to the table. At least we have an idea where we stand financially and what we can support, rather than, I think in the past it's been a case of one request comes, then we respond to that. If we can anticipate that and put it in the budget process, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver, then Councillor Burdick.
Yes, thank you. And after Councillor Feeney spoke, I was going to suggest that if that was a motion, if he was making a motion to refer it to budget, then I would second it. And it seems like the Deputy Mayor has sort of built on that as well. But maybe if a motion is to be made, it could include the concept of asking the various parties to coordinate their requests so that we can consider it in the budget. I see that it's either CAO wants to comment on.
Yes, CAO, did you want to address Councillor Carver's comment?
Well, just the general direction of the comments with regards to the budget referral. So if I understood Deputy Mayor, if we refer this to the budget as is, it does end up being a standalone item rather than a part of the grants. We do have a grants application deadline of the end of this month. Clerk, that's correct, right? The end of this month is the grants deadline. So alternatively, we could ask the chamber and or the Garden Club to go through that grants request process. Otherwise, if we refer it to the budget, we'll just bring whatever our information that we are able to gather by that point. But it won't necessarily provide that consistent view that the Deputy Mayor was referencing in terms of the variety of grant requests that we do receive.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burdick?
Yes, I was going to agree with the referring it to either like having them apply for a grant. But I was also thinking about the budget process, and when it's happening this year, it's a little bit later than
Planting
maybe,
season.
yeah. So that might be a consideration also. I'm not a gardener, so I'm not sure if that's too late or when flowers go up, but I feel like they tend to sort of go up in end of May, early June. So that might be something to think about.
Okay. CAO and then Deputy Clerk?
Well, I was just thinking about this in reference to another grant request that we were getting some questions about, which was from the Mahone Bay Music Association. And the same kind of thing holds true. The timing of the grants, usually getting into consideration the grants in April does help to get back to these groups while they're still planning their season. Typically, we've been pretty in line with prior year's budgets as far as grants go. So I think we could have a report on grants applied for to council in April, post the deadline, and council may wish to make some authorizations at that time. At least you'll have the full list of everybody who's applied for grants to consider. So maybe we could have that as an April budget, a regular meeting item, a special meeting in April perhaps. And we don't have to approve absolutely everything, but if there are some that clearly it would be beneficial to move on sooner rather than later, I don't think we need to stand on too much ceremony, but it still lets us keep that March 31st deadline.
Clerk? Then Councillor Carver.
Experience with the flower baskets in the last several years. It has been years since they've done the flower baskets in Mahone Bay, but before that, it was, my recollection is that the town would purchase a flower basket that the town purchased, if that was the choice of the council at the time, and then baskets were purchased by others. People could contribute to the program, but that was not something that was run through the town. And I believe if I look at the letter from Ms. Sanderson, that the discussion is about cost and maintenance of 2 baskets. So I believe this may be, or early on in the discussion, council was talking about connecting this request with the chamber and follow up to the conversation we recently had with them about this program. So that may be, maybe the discussion that comes forward to council is about what would a basket cost if the town decided to, if the chamber comes up with this is the type of basket we're all going to get or something like that. But in my experience, the program in the past was that people contributed and that's what determined how many baskets were. But I would think it would be good to clarify the plan with the chamber before bringing something forward, because that was not my understanding of our discussion, that they wanted the town to take a lead, just help out with hooks and stuff.
The chamber's proposal, I think you're talking to. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Well, I'm going to make a stab at a motion and see where it goes. I would like to move that council direct staff to respond to the Garden Club's request or letter suggesting that the Garden Club collaborate with the Mahone Bay Tourism Chamber of Commerce on their proposals for the flower baskets, and that they submit a grant proposal if they wish to have town's financial support for that project.
Okay. You've heard the motion.
I'll second
Councillor
that, Mayor.
Feeney. Councillor Feeney seconds. On the motion, on the question of the motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Carver.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I think just another item. I think it is true within our grants policy that we do have a hard deadline of March 31st. And I know, especially the last couple of years, that date comes upon us quickly, and we may want to revisit if that's the best date, but it obviously was always correlated to our budget deliberation process. But I know last year, a lot of our requests came in late, and we dealt with them throughout the year. I'm wondering if it might be appropriate for us to reach out to the usual suspects like Principal Eason at Bay, for Baybu, and the Mahone Bay Heritage Boat Society, and we all know the list, that there's maybe a dozen recipients. If we want to hold true to the March 31st, if we feel that we'd be more lenient, we'll agree to deal with them throughout the calendar year. I think we've done that historically, and we thought that didn't work all that well. So if we are going to enforce the March 31st deadline, I do think it behooves us to maybe make some inquiry to solicit the requests for those one pagers.
So is that a motion to direct staff to take said action?
Well, I guess I take the counsel of, that Maureen might have, if that seems like a good idea, or whether she thinks based on her communication with these organizations, it's in good hands and nothing to worry about. But I'm not trying to make work. I'm just trying to make sure the machine runs so we don't have to revisit the bylaw between now and March 31st.
Yeah, that would be a little bit difficult because I think right now we're still at a point in time where a lot of these requests that we would have received late, on the one hand, they would have been told, we really need to get this by March 31st. So hope, do that again. But the other, some of the specific clubs or organizations that you referenced are probably still in a position where they don't know what they're going to do this summer. Things are starting to open up in the province, but I think that's something that we hear a lot, is that people are still trying to figure out what this year is going to look like for them. So I would say we could take a look at what's there, and I'm just frantically trying to open the right policy to find out what the specific wording is. But as to what council wants to do about that, I couldn't say.
Well, there's another meeting, Mayor, in May. So.
Okay, Councillor Carver.
Could we, on a one-time basis, move that deadline up 2 months? I mean, just make that decision to do that, given
The end of May, Councillor Carver?
Yeah.
So if I could comment, we earlier mentioned that the season and how most of these groups and organizations want to hear back sooner rather than later on their applications. I know that several that have received funding from the town before are aware of our normal deadline and plan to make application. I think over the last few years, when we've had requests come in, we typically remind them of the deadline and encourage them to submit. I think, as long as we continue to do that, there's no real problem with the deadline itself. But as to Councillor Feeney's point, if there are organizations that applied last year and received funding last year, it would be reasonable that they would be reminded that the grant program is still available to them. And Maureen, I think we're only talking about a dozen or less groups, and I think at least half of them have been in contact or generally are in contact. So hopefully we could dig up email contacts for the others. And I think the grants program is typically promoted, what is it, in the newsletter, December, January, something like that. So I don't know if we have done those promotions at this point, but a reminder is always good. We've got a few weeks left.
So, that strikes me as a good idea. And so, I'd move that council direct staff to reach out to the recipients of last year's grants and remind them of the March 31st deadline.
Okay.
Via email or phone call or a cup of coffee at Tim Hortons, Maureen, whatever is the easiest way to.
Lettergram, carrier pigeon.
Exactly.
Councillor Carver? Second that. Good. Thank you. Did anyone not get a grant last year, clerk, that you're aware of because they may have been late in applying?
I do not have that type of recollection of everything that came in as compared to everything that went out. I'm sorry, I'd have to look up that information for you.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, I'd have to ask the finance department to look that up for me so that I could respond to you.
I forgot, what were we talking about?
Yeah.
I think we can say that we didn't have any grant requests that came in late citing an awareness of the deadline anyway. We have requests for funding that come up mid-year, but they've never been anyone who cited that they were aware of our program or that there was a deadline.
Okay. So we have a motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. The final one in the correspondence action item list is a note from Saltbox Brewing Company looking to make the account. Councillor Carver?
I'm sorry, there is a second request from the Mahone Bay Garden Society.
I'm sorry, I just assumed we'd do that at the same time.
Oh, well, but it's a different topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so in
Let's look at the
response,
proposed changes.
yeah, so in
Item B.
response,
Item Part B. Right? A and B, the garden, this is the garden over by the church parking lot.
yes. So I'm just wondering, in fact, does that need to have a motion, or is that something that could be dealt with at the staff level?
CAO?
So yeah, I didn't get to speak to this one. We were focused on the basket. So I think that there should be a motion if council is supportive of this. I wanted to say that I think the request is supportable at the staff level in terms of the request for tobacco assistance, and much like we did with preparing the entrance to the aquatic gardens, I'm sure we can make the time on Public Works schedule to do that. I was also thinking this might be a good opportunity as part of the work with, I had recently mentioned that Policy and Strategy Committee with respect to the crossings there and the reconfiguration of the Anglican Church crossing not to cross directly into the out lane of vehicular traffic from the parking lot. We would be doing some concrete work in the edge of that green space there, not exactly where this planting is discussed, but it might be an opportunity to talk to the garden club about as we're remediating that space, if there's some things that they might be able to recommend in there. So I think the timing is good.
So I will make a motion then, move that council direct staff to thank Jenny Sanderson for the update on the work of the garden club, and B, to work with the garden club on the upgrades to the specified garden, the K Gray garden. Is that specific enough?
I think it should be. Seconded, Councillor Burdick. Okay. You heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Now, let's go to the, Councillor Feeney, did you have a?
Oh, pardon me, Mayor, I was just going to speak to 4.3.
Yes, the salt box.
Mayor, I'd move the council direct staff to forward the request for the permanent patio extension to our town planners and out of courtesy copy the members of the PAC.
Okay. Councillor Now seconds. Deputy Mayor, comment?
Just, I guess from my own understanding, I was wondering in terms of process, the last time there was something, I guess, of a similar nature. When the request came to council, it came with some background before we forwarded it to PAC, but this did not. And sort of wondering, or maybe it's me who's mistaken. So wondering how this landed without any, I guess, collateral material from the planning staff. Is this part of the process? Is this how it should be handled, or?
Well, just one second, Deputy Mayor. Clerk, did you want to comment on process?
Yes, thank you. So what normally happens is that the request comes to council. It is then directed to staff, to planning staff in this case, and then it is the planning staff that will find the further information. We have at times received requests that come with some more information, but that's generally from people that are familiar with the process and or may have some of that information at hand, but generally the request that comes in is very simple. And then the planners work with the applicant to build that information to go forward for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Now?
Yeah, I just wanted to verify on the second part of that motion that the information will also be forwarded on to the members of the PAC so that they're kept in the loop, because I think they've been feeling a little left out on some of these things. So I think if we keep them in the loop, it'll maintain their interest.
Okay. CAO, did you want to comment on process vis-a-vis the notion of a development agreement and which is in play here? What's your perspective on it?
I can provide some commentary on that, which so when it comes back from the planning staff to PAC, there'll be a report from Garth outlining this, but essentially the current allowance for the patio was made as a suspension of enforcement pursuant to the state of emergency for COVID. So with that state of emergency lifting, that stay of enforcement would be ending, and we would be enforcing land use bylaw, which prohibits the patio. So knowing that is coming up, they've submitted this request, but ultimately we can't accept this request as anything but a modification of the development agreement for the property. So the requester is well aware that the planners will recommend that this means reopening the development agreement for consideration of this request, and they've asked that that be a standalone request to revisit the development agreement. So we'll go through the development agreement process with respect to the patio at the request of the requesting party here.
Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Burdick.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. And so I guess personally, from my side of things, thinking about when the report comes to the table, I hope this would be okay for me to specify that I think it'd be helpful for me if part of the report included the original request for a development agreement for that piece of property and all the subsequent additions that have, or alterations that have been made to date, so that at least we have a full picture of how the business, I guess, has been doing and how much we've changed the development agreement from the initial, I guess, status that was requested. Will that be okay to ask?
CAO?
Yeah, I think it's certainly fine to ask. Expect ours would do something in that area as far as exactly how to call back to the previous development agreement processes, I think I would leave that in his hands, but to provide the request, say we'd like to see that clarified in the report, I don't think that's unreasonable.
And if we go back into what amounts to a renegotiation on the development agreement, the requirement comes back of notifying the citizens who live in the immediate area that the new development agreement is in the offing and giving them an opportunity, if they have any, to raise any concerns?
That would be my understanding of the process, and I'm sure Garth will outline that in his report as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burdick.
Thank you, Mayor. You took the words out of my mouth because that was going to be my question. And my assumption was that they were going to, that it would then be also presented to neighbors once again. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Clerk?
Question, did we have a seconder for that motion?
We will have Councillor now. In appreciation of procedure, we should have a motion, have a seconder, and on the question, have the discussion. But we should have the motion and seconder first.
I had seconded earlier, right after Councilor Feeney made the motion, so.
I think you gave us one of those, didn't you? Yes, okay. All right. So moved and seconded. You've heard the comments on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. There ends the correspondence for action. Let's go to correspondence for information. What is your wish? Councillor Carver.
I would like to move that the correspondence items 5.1 to 5.5 be received and filed. And then I do have a question on one of them.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson seconds your question, please, Councillor Carver.
So my question is about 5.4, about the increase in the NSFM dues. And I wonder if the Mr. Hyde could tell us what the increase is.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. So I think there was a change in the way that the dues are being calculated now. I have to see if I can dig up a copy of this request on our part. But so the increase was cited in the letter that we're referencing as a 14% increase over last year. But the formula for the dues calculation changed this past year. So I don't have it handy whether our increase was proportionate. I think the formula changing may have resulted in differential increases for different types of municipal units. I'll see if I can dig up how much our percentage changed. It would be presented in the budget when we get there in any case,
Okay.
but since that's a little ways off, I'll see what I can find.
Okay, well, it's not urgent then. I don't want to spend time on it now. But just so we have that information at some point. Thank you.
Okay. You've heard the motion. Again, on the question, Councillor Burdick.
I do have a question about item 5.5. And when I saw this particular item come up, it made me think that I wonder if, and I know that we're going to be talking about this later in the month, but it makes me wonder about the difference between a proclamation and engagement on social media, if there is one, if there is a differentiation there. Because in this letter, the request is made that our town's proclamation be on social media platforms about the founding of Freetown. So to me, I'm like that's a question that I have, is about what distinguishes a town proclamation and this might come up later in the meeting anyway also, versus a basic, like an endorsement or a social media post? Is there a distinguishing, is there anything that distinguishes these things, or are they one and the same?
Deputy Clerk, would you like to respond?
Well, there's a couple things happening here. One, this letter was the source of some discussion because this did not happen. But I believe that it was just sent a blanket send, probably. So it was addressed to council, so it ends up on the agenda. But as far as what is the difference between a proclamation and like an official proclamation and expressing support, I think that is a discussion that will come up. As Councillor Burdick said, there's an opportunity later on this agenda, but certainly there is, this is something that's being proposed later in the agenda. The proclamation policy has been proposed for the next meeting of the Policy and Strategy Committee. I will say that an official proclamation is a very specific thing, but I am certainly interested to hear how this conversation goes among the people that vote around the table.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We have a motion to receive and file, moved and seconded. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to staff reports to council. This is the first report for the month. This is the easy one, right? Mr. Hyde, if you would, please. Are you ready to take questions from members of council?
Yeah, as usual, we've presented the report. As you say, this is the easy one. Only the first section assigned from council is updated, and happy to take questions on that or any other part of the report.
Okay. Questions from members of council? Councillor Carver, I think.
I had a series of questions that I just can't find at the moment. So if you give me a moment,
Yeah, okay.
maybe somebody else could ask a question.
And apologies,
Deputy-
Penny, I did read your questions and I just didn't have time to get back to them today. I'm sorry about that.
Deputy Mayor Kangata.
So my question is about, I guess, the overall layout of the report. I know this has come up a few times in the past, and I did not want to contribute to stress on Dylan's part, but you had mentioned at some point, I think in the very early days, about potential to take a stab at having a dashboard kind of approach to the reporting on a regular basis, changing from this kind of format. And I was wondering whether that's still something you're hoping to veer to, because I think it might be very, very helpful in terms of not having repetition of stuff, meeting in, meeting out, and being able to just not have to pour through a whole, I can't remember how many pages, and be able to just see a snapshot of what things you're involved in and what's being reported as critical at a particular time. I wonder whether you still consider that something you might explore, or are we stuck with this format for now?
Well, it's really just a question of what council would need to see done. As far as highlighting things that have changed, there's only two ways that I can really see to do that with the reporting format here. Everything changes every time that the members, the staff management team members update their sections. So those sections may still have some overlap because we do a lot of the same stuff every month, but they do generally when they're changed, they're updated. You know, people read through the whole thing to make sure that that information represents the current status. With the assignments to staff, it would be possible to add maybe a code to the number system along the side, something just to color signify if anything has changed in that item. So where we have about 50 of them now, I don't think it would be difficult when there's a material change to the notes to add, maybe to highlight the color. So if number 7 had a note change, we could highlight number 7 and you could scroll down and that would call your attention to that. I think that's an option. In terms of a dashboard, the budget report, which I don't think is the part that people find the most time consuming to review, is the one that might be best suited to highlighting updates on specific projects. And I think the bigger challenge there, as we've talked about at Audit and Finance Committee, is reporting on costs that have been incurred rather than costs that have actually been paid, because the budget report is a lot less valuable as long as it's only reporting on costs that have actually been paid. Many times we've incurred the cost and even completed the work long before we're invoiced for it and have paid for it. So you're not getting a very up-to-date report. So those are kind of some thoughts about ways we're still trying to improve the report. But as far as noting within the assignments to staff, which for this meeting is the only new updated part, we can certainly take away that note to highlight the materially updated items. And as long as I can remember to do it, and you can remember to remind me again, Francis, if I don't do it with the next meeting, I don't think that's any problem.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I found my questions. So I won't deal with them all, but one of them is under the clerk section. What is the estimated time of delivery for the draft plan review to come to the steering team?
So I know it's under the clerk section, but I do believe that that kind of odd question is on me as much as it is on anyone. At this point, I think we will be able to get that finalized on Upland's end within the month of March. So if it's just a matter of making sure that it can be scheduled to a meeting as soon as everyone is available, my hope would be that that would not be any later than the end of this month, beginning of the next month, possibly in consideration of the timing of the PAC meeting that now actually does have a agenda, as we're now going to get a report, I presume, on the request from Andrew. So we could try to schedule around that availability. But I think that we will be able to get that report delivered shortly. And there has been some hold up on the part of staff, myself included, in going back and forth on Jason's update. So yeah, I think we're nearly there.
It's on the horizon. Excellent. Thank you. So my next question, a similar vein, is about the discussions with the fire department. And is it about developing a bylaw or an MOU? I can't remember what the title is. Is it a bylaw or an MOU? At any rate, my question is whether council will receive an update, progress to date and next steps and estimated target date for completion. And then
I think it's all of the above. To answer your question, Penny, we are working on a bylaw, and Mo will give an update on that progress. There have been a couple of public information meetings, stakeholder sessions with the fire department members in that interest. But we also have to complete a agreement with the society around occupancy of the new hall, having to do with the contributions that the society committed to making. And that will be, effectively an MOU with respect to the new facility, understanding that. So those are both happening at this point. And Mo, did you want to add anything with respect to the bylaw?
Update after the last stakeholder public information meeting at the with the fire department members. There's a lot of information. Brought some information forward about what type of information is typically found in this type of bylaw based on my research, and also some information about the questions that were asked at the first stakeholder public information meeting. So then how would those things appear or not appear? Is that something that would show up in the bylaw? You know, we asked some questions and, you know, brought some information back, and that was a lot of information to take in. So the decision was that the fire department members were going to have a meeting and discuss what all of that means. And then I will follow up with the chief when they've had an opportunity to digest and discuss. And then, yes, certainly bring something forward to council, just so everyone's aware of the progress where we are.
And my other question regarding the discussions with the fire department has to do with the recent merger of the Greenwich and Windsor fire departments. And there was a very detailed report that was written that resulted in that recommendation. And I wonder if there was some very useful information, at least I thought, in that report. And will there be consideration of that report as our bylaw is being developed?
Clerk?
Not familiar with this report. Where did you find this report, Councillor Carver?
I thought I had sent it to everybody.
I sent it out. It was from a CBC News news page. I sent it to all the members of council and to the CAO for information purposes.
Yeah, and the report was embedded in that,
Yes.
in that article. I can send it. I've saved it separately, but I can send it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the video surveillance policy, what other jurisdictions in Lunenburg County use video surveillance? That's not the staff report. Sorry.
Yeah, that's coming
Okay,
up later.
I think I'm done with staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question on the staff report? Hearing none, entertain a motion to accept the report as presented. Moved by Councillor Burdick, seconded by Councillor Wilson. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to item 6.2, Public Works Department relocation. There is a motion embedded in that one for council to consider. CAO, would you like to lead the charge?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for members of council who have been here for some time, this is not a report that comes as any surprise. I hope it doesn't come as much of a surprise for anyone on council. We have talked about the opportunity, I suppose, of relocating the public works operations. I think Jonathan has now had a little bit more than 6 months in the role as manager of public works and transportation, and in providing this report has focused on the need to relocate the department. The report certainly makes a case for it not being a reasonable thing to continue in the current location or invest in it. We do not provide a lot of consideration to options such as building a new facility. That's entirely because we have a facility that, you know, has just become surplus to the town's needs and would serve the role well. Historically, the current public works building was inherited by the public works department from the fire department, and it seems reasonable to consider doing the same with the Kinburn Street location. So there certainly would be additional analysis that could be performed around other scenarios for the relocation of the public works operation, but I think the case is made compellingly that relocation of the department is necessary, and our recommendation would be not to belabor the point and look at the facility we've got. With a little bit of outlay on project development, we could come back with a hopefully fairly firm estimation of any costs associated with making the building suitable. Council could then give a final yay or nay to proceeding with that project in the budget. But between now and the budget process, to get approval to undertake a reasonable expenditure, to ensure that we're making an informed decision. And at the same time, you know, if council is looking for other information to inform that decision, that information could likely also be obtained. So any questions or comments in that regard, happy to respond to now. And there is a recommendation provided from Jonathan in the report.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Two questions, really. I remember that when we talked about the new fire hall, if I can call it that. The reason we were given for not continuing to use this facility as the social hall and bingo hall and so on was that it was in a state of disrepair that was going to require it basically to not be used after about 10 years. Now, I don't know what that was based on, but that's what we were told. So I guess my question is, how worried should council be that we're going to be stuck with a huge bill when we start looking into renovations on this building to make it safe and yet all the other things? The second question I have is, does this proposal suggest that Public Works is taking over the entire building, or are they just taking over the bays and the offices at the back of the bays?
Okay. Councillor Carver, we'll let the CAO respond to Councillor Wilson if you're in agreement. CAO, please.
Sure. So to the first question, the recommendation is to expend approximately $12,000 in the interest of understanding fully if there would be any impending renovations that would be necessary. I think we have to understand the difference between necessary or desirable in this case. If you're looking at the existing Public Works building, you know, you could come a long way from that and still not be talking about an ideal structure. You know, so I think we need to be clear that the Public Works Department would be very happy, as they have been in the past, to take on something that the fire department found to be not sufficient for their operation. And there's a difference in the operation and what they need and what they're used to. So I think that the intention here would be to spend some money up front, confirm those possible icebergs that might be lurking, and go in with our eyes open to authorizing if we are going to do any renovation of the building. But then any renovation would be only as necessary to ensure that the building could be safely used by Public Works, and they have minimal aspirations in terms of that. As far as the whole space, the report does suggest including the whole space with respect to project development. It may be that there's no substantiated use for some of the space for Public Works purposes. I think that we will find, based on our lack of indoor heated storage space for Public Works or utilities, that there is a considerable utility to turning over additional space in the building for that purpose. But, you know, that's one of those things that can be assessed as part of project development work. If it's clear the Public Works has no, you know, significant material use for the space, then that would come up and would be something we could look at as an opportunity to be addressed.
Thank you. Councillor Carver, and then Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I had circulated my questions, and so perhaps other members of council have seen this idea, and it's a bit of a devil's advocate kind of question. While absolutely honoring the need for a proper building and station for Public Works, this is a piece of land that the town owns alongside another quite sizable piece of land on the other side of Hawthorne. And the question of affordable housing is always on our minds and in our strategic plan. And so I just want, as a devil's advocate kind of question, would like to put out the scenario that if there were a nonprofit organization that was willing to build affordable housing, and given the scenario now where there is loosening up of what municipalities can do with land around land trusts or donating land. Would we council consider an arrangement to promote or facilitate the building of some affordable housing? And so this is just an argument in a way for not committing I'm just getting a sign that my internet connection is unstable. So not committing ourselves in perpetuity to the idea that Public Works will have a claim on the building and on the yard across Hawthorne. I'd just like to put that out there for us all to consider. It's a piece of land, 2 pieces of land that the town owns that conceivably could be used for affordable housing.
Deputy Mayor, was your comment along the same vein as Councillor Carver? I know it was an issue that you had raised in our discussions on the strategic plan.
Yes, I'm glad that somebody else on council has raised it, because I think it's something worth a conversation. However, I also I've had conversations with the CEO in the past, and I do understand the need to have a better situation and a better facility for public works. So there is, I guess, competing needs here in this particular case. But I still have that concern around the cost of renovating this old structure and how much money we will be paying sort of ongoing basis, whether it's to heat it or to keep it in a state that can be well used for public works. That I have a lot of concern about. And I would want to suggest that maybe this agenda item, I don't think with the time we have tonight, we'll be able to have a very good deliberation about that piece of property. We might have some deliberation, but I don't think we'll be doing our taxpayers a good service by having a rushed conversation about it. I think this is a significant piece of property for the town. It has multiple, angles to look at it from that I think we need to carefully consider. And I was sort of wondering whether we can either have a special meeting of council for it, or maybe include it in the next policy and strategy, so that we can have a very wholesome conversation about that property and the adjacent property, so to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Burdick. And then Councillor Feeney, and then CAO.
I agree that this is maybe worth a bit more discussion. Another thing that I think that maybe could be considered in the mix if the building on Kinburn is not, if it works for housing, that would be incredible. If it doesn't, I think it's still also a public space that might be a possible consideration for a daycare, for example. We have a lot of that's been a discussion that's come up in the past, and my understanding is that it might be a more possible thing now with the $10 a day daycare idea being unveiled. So I do think that there are multiple possible uses, as well as for public works, or instead of that, that might be worth considering, especially given the location, which is a very accessible location in the middle of town, with a really large road next to it. I did have a question about the Aberdeen Lane, if that's okay, and that was, is it? My impression is that it's in such horrible shape, and I can tell that it is. I don't dispute that. But is the main option there that it be torn down, essentially, and then something else being put up in or a parking lot? I know was the other possibility there, but it being cleared essentially rather than renovated.
Okay. CAO, would you like to answer that? Give a response to Councillor Burdick?
Sure, yeah, just on the last discrete question there, but the building on Aberdeen, we do expect it would need to be demolished. The recommendation will end up being to use it for parking, but we did have evaluation done on the space. It is large enough of a lot to technically be developed as a commercial lot. It does meet the minimum guidelines for development, so it has some resale value if the property has been properly remediated. I will say one of the reasons garages often end up as parking lots is because they may not do very well in testing once the property is torn down, because it has been used as a garage for so many years. But I don't have any testing to say that. In fact, we have tested on the town hall property, and the soil results were good. So no issues known, but that might be an issue. With regards to the highest and best use of the previous fire station, I guess two quick things I wanted to mention. One is, not to be flippant, but if there's a concern around renovations to use it as a public works garage, the concern around renovations to use it as housing or for a daycare are certainly going to come back as much more substantial costs involved. Not to suggest that that's inherently prohibitive, but just to go in with both eyes open. The second comment would be that if we are talking about, wanting to look at different options for the building, the same type of an external contracted service would be recommended. Just trying to learn from experience here, I really think we would be best served to have a company attached to evaluate uses for the building. I'd rather they have a restricted scope to look at public works use of the building, but I'm sure it would be reasonable to have the same company assess the potential to renovate it for housing purposes, for example, if that was in fact council's desire to do. And not against having a special meeting if we can find a time to do that, but I know we have a couple of other similar requests on the list.
Okay. Councillor Feeney, then Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Now.
Mayor, I'm pleased with the way the conversation is evolving. I think generally we're all on the same page in a desire to make sure that asset is appropriately turned into, whatever it's going to be next. So, I think there were some excellent points. I agree with everything the Deputy Mayor said. I agree with everything I think everybody said tonight, including the CAO, about next steps. So specifically on next steps, I think what I'm hearing is that this request for the $12,000 will simply go to informing council about the opportunities with the other building, but it won't lock us into a decision on what we should do, and maybe our inevitable decision could be we'll just sell the facility. We'll just we'll just sell it and take the proceeds and build a purpose-built garage for public works. So, at this point, I think the general consensus is that we don't have one because we haven't completed that due diligence and the process about what could this be next. But I think we'll get there in due course. I guess the question for me is whether we want to have whether to take the Deputy Mayor's suggestion, of which I'm completely comfortable with, of having another conversation before we pull the trigger on the procurement of the project manager who could help frame up all the moving parts for us, or whether there was any time sensitivity that we're kind of unaware of that would require us to make that call tonight. So I don't know, Dylan, are we causing a lot of grief if we move this item down the road another couple of weeks to have another conversation about it?
CAO?
No, I wouldn't say that. The more that we have the conversation here, I look at the way it's termed, and I think that, reasonably we are in the middle of a project, we're near the end of a project to build a new fire station and fire hall, and perhaps we want to, make this a little bit broader from the comments around the table and say that this is really a piece around the future of the now surplus former fire hall, and if so, reasonably, I think it might be a good little addenda to the contract that we currently have around the fire station project management. So, I guess I would say that the time sensitivity might be, if we did want to treat it that way and say what we're really looking for is a analysis of the former building and the best use for it from here, and have that as an addenda on the existing contract with respect to the new building, then ideally we would get to that conclusion and engage before the project management contract on the new fire station build is completed. But I think we've got till the end of the month at least.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, CL, is this something that can be done on parallel tracks? That, we can have the discussion around the policy and strategy table about our issues as to the future of the space, whether it's the building or the land, simultaneous with someone looking at the value of what's there, how it can be reconfigured, what a new construction piece might cost, as opposed to trying to do it in a linear or sequential fashion.
The only, I think, value to having the conversation first is around defining the scope of engagement. Like I mentioned, I think if this were to become a final piece of project management for the fire station project, saying what do we do with the now empty building, I think I could go and get a proposal in that regard for consideration and do that in parallel to the council's scheduling that session. But we might want to refine our expectations around the scope based on that conversation. So it's kind of a chicken or egg in that regard.
Agreed. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Now, and then Councillor Carver.
Thank you. First of all, what I wanted to say was what Councillor Feeney just said, which is one of the things we should throw in to the churn is perhaps we should sell it to somebody and build a purpose-built facility for our public works people. So I agree with that notion. I also understand what the CAO was saying about broadening the scope of the proposal to spend the $12,000, because that has to be spent in any event to find out what in fact we have. But one thing that struck me is that this may be a really, really good opportunity to issue an RFP, a request for proposals, to the public about what could be done with that building, because there are probably ideas out there that none of us have thought of, and we could use the revenue from that to build affordable housing, build a public works facility, put a splash pad in, who knows?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Now, then Councillor Carver.
I agree with what Councillor Feeney and Councillor Wilson was saying. I'm not sure for us to try to take it over as affordable housing, how that would work. You have to look at the actual size of the piece of the land, and also that we got to consider that the fire department is responding up the roadway beside the old fire hall to new fire hall to respond to emergencies. So there's not a whole lot of parking there. I think we have to look at very seriously at something for the public works, because that building in behind there, I'm just not sure how long that's going to last before it comes tumbling down on us anyway. And we have to look at that safety. Also, another question that was raised around the town hall renovation was public parking. So if we were to move the public works somewhere, maybe it be into a new building or into the old fire hall station, I think the proper way of handling that would be to demolish the current public works building, make it into parking lot. Town staff could park there, allowing the public to use the front parking lot, which is more accessible for them, and use the excess parking in behind. So I think that would make a perfect solution to some of the parking problems that we currently have at Town Hall.
Thank you. Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I really like the way the conversation went in terms of broadening the questions about the best use of, I'm pairing it up with the land on the other side, the Public Works yard. Oh, I'm getting that message again. My internet connection's unstable. But so I really would value continuing that discussion in some way, however, whatever form that might take. But I have another question, which is about the CAO's comments that the land has been declared surplus, and would that have to be by a council vote that it be declared surplus?
I'm sorry, I used the terminology colloquially and I regretted it when I was using it, but it's surplus to the operations of the fire department at this point. But no, it's not surplus as in under the MGA for resale or anything.
Okay.
That would be a council.
Thank you. But I do hope that we continue the conversation in some venue, some format. I think it's an important conversation to have. And certainly when I raised the question of affordable housing, I wasn't implying that the municipality should develop affordable housing there, but to make it available for affordable housing. So that was the way I was thinking about it.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Carver. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the codes of life I like living with is learning from past mistakes. And one past, I guess, not mistake, but one past lesson learned for me was the approach and the way in which the town renovation had come to the table. We found things on the go, and I felt that in many ways we were latching from one decision to another. And so I would love to urge that even considering the 12,000 to be spent before we have that conversation, to not take that approach, but have a fulsome conversation, determine exactly what that 12,000 is being spent to do, so that we have a full agreement and an understanding this is what council is looking for, and then we can move on to other pieces. Because yes, there might be a rush, but it's a rush we're putting on ourselves. It's not, from my perspective, it's not a rush that somebody else or another body is putting on us. It's a rush we are determining we want to put it on. So I'm not against the building being used for public works. Let me be clear about that. But I think that decision needs to be made in a more wholesome, not rushed process. And that's what I'm asking for. Let's have that conversation, talk about all these different options, whether it's an RFP or a defined scope of whoever's coming to look at things, then we can be comfortable as to the decisions we make going forward, that we've really thought this through and we've looked at all the options that we have.
Is that a motion to defer this item to the next Policy and Strategy Committee meeting?
I would prefer a special meeting of council. I know we don't have, there's a lot to do, but I think this is, for me, it's that important. It's a huge asset for the town that we have a special meeting between now and I guess the end of the month, or maybe in the next 1 month.
So that's a motion to staff to find an appropriate opportunity for a special meeting to discuss this item.
Yes, please.
Okay. Seconded, Councillor Feeney? Okay, you've heard the motion. Clerk?
I'm unclear, was there a timeline with that motion, Deputy Mayor?
Go ahead.
In a month, within a month from now, that should be good enough.
So before the first council meeting in April. Okay, sooner the better, but certainly no later than the first council meeting in April. Okay, you've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to item 6.3, public participation in planning policy. big P. P.
So we have here a necessary update. I guess, Maureen, how would you feel about presenting the recommendation for this since you wrote it?
That'd be fine. Thank you. So yes, Bill 58 has been passed, and with that bill, there is a requirement to update the public participation portion. I apologize for the alliteration, but we just can't seem to get away from it with this particular matter. So we are required to update our public participation program to include notification to adjoining municipalities in the instance of an update to planning strategies. That is timely for the town of Mahone Bay because, as you're all aware, we're working on that process right now. We did develop an ad hoc staff group to talk about the implications of this bill, what that would actually look like, how that would be actioned. And while we each are bringing it to our separate municipalities, we did discuss, we're talking within Lunenburg County about how we share information amongst ourselves. So this is what we've come up with, and we've talked about process and how that would work. The other thing the only thing that's really changed with that is that we would share information really with our adjoining neighbor about whatever's happening. And that's reciprocal. So the only other thing that came up is that when we were discussing this at the staff level, the public participation process is a very specific part of passing planning documents. But we were discussing the fact that I frequently have conversations with members of the public. We started that conversation already this evening. What happens when we get a request for a planning matter? When this or any particular issue goes forward as a planning matter, I will often end up speaking with members of the public. And I talk about our public planning, our participation program. Now I'm lost in this. I will talk about that, but that discussion with the public about what to expect does not end at this particular aspect. That conversation also goes into the fact that we then have a public hearing. So since we were going to be bringing forward this policy, suggesting an amendment so that we can be in alignment with the update to the MGA, we have also suggested the addition of 3.7, just to reference the fact that after everything has been done as outlined in this policy, there is then a public hearing process that is followed according to the Municipal Government Act.
Wow. That's the public participation in planning policy perfectly presented. Thank you.
Precisely.
So the motion that's highlighted at the end of your presentation, that council adopt the amended public participation in planning policy, is that sufficient? Rather, is that precise?
Policies require 7 days notice. So it is the procedure of the town of Mahone Bay that we put a draft policy for consideration on an agenda, and then it is actually considered for passage at the next meeting of council.
Yes.
So the suggested motion at the end of the report is that would be passed at the March 24th council meeting. That's the next regular meeting of council.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
So I think this is a good change in many ways from a housing perspective and social housing conversations. One of the challenges I think we've seen in the past around planning changes across the board was that, I guess, disjointed nature, which I guess by by the nature of how things are done, every unit will do things by themselves. And so that leaves some room for improvement around considerations for where municipalities, especially between municipalities and towns, have boundaries. And so when we think about our town, for example, we've talked about how scarce land is, for example, and what kinds of conversations do we need to be having with models so that their municipal planning strategy and land use bylaws to a certain extent can promote some growth in the areas that are close to Mahone Bay. And investigating at least one property, I found that in some cases, yes, it does, but in other cases, not necessarily so. And I think this is a very good opportunity to even go a step further rather than just inform, to when we come to discuss Plan Mahone Bay, to think about the spillover effects and what conversations we might need to have with model around the neighboring properties and where there's potential for development, and to see whether there's some synergy between the changes we're putting in place to encourage development and the changes they might put in place in their new planning strategy going forward. So it's not necessarily about this public participation piece, but I just wanted to put a plug in sort of us thinking about that piece. I might forget to bring that up when it comes up, but I hope by mentioning it, somebody will remember and we can make sure that those conversations are happening.
Clerk?
Yeah, there's a very specific note in there that it be forwarded to the clerk in the adjoining municipality so that it does not just stay among planning staff. So that is very specific inclusion. I'd like to say we thought of that, but that is part of the new legislation.
Okay.
And maybe just a follow up, and we've had a back and forth with the clerk on this. I was sort of wondering the clause about 3.7, will you include both sections, 205 and 206?
I noticed the deputy mayor is smiling because we did have a lot of back and forth about this. So the public participation section in the Municipal Government Act is section 204, and that states that the municipality must have a public participation program. Section 205, which is referenced in the suggested amendment of section 3.7 in the policy. Section 205 of the Municipal Government Act refers to the fact that a public hearing must be held. It references that a public hearing must be held, that notification must be given, and then it gets into the specifics of that public hearing, such as only those councillors in attendance are able to vote, and those other pieces. Section 206, which after spending some time emailing with the deputy mayor this afternoon, I believe that section 206 is unfairly labeled public hearing. Section 206 refers to the specifics of how notification is given, and that is where the requirements are contained, that the time period and notifications, that it must be in papers, that there must be a brief outline of the changes, the specific information that is included in the notice, and how and when that's given. So yes, section 3.7, which is proposed for an amended public participation and planning policy, that section refers to section 205 of the Municipal Government Act, which states that a public hearing must be held and how that hearing is to be held, and that notice must be given. But then the deputy mayor's question was about should there also be a reference to section 206, which states the specifications of how that notice is given. And I apologize for all the glossy eyes.
Okay.
So whether that would be that's, I think, a fairly simple fix if that's something council would like to do, and we could make that amendment for when it comes back to council on the 24th, but that's a council decision.
Okay. Any other questions? So you have everything that you need, clerk?
I would be interested that if anybody else has thoughts on the inclusion of section 206 as well as section 205. If you would like to see that change made, please let me know. But as of right now, my plan is to just bring this forward in March 24th and find a way to present without alliteration if possible.
Good, well planned. Okay. Thank you. Such serious business.
So
Okay.
I seriously propose that we include both of them, because I think, I guess, difference of opinion, the one does not cover what actually needs to be done. So I would propose that we say that section says, let me read it. A public hearing will be held in accordance with section 205 and 206 of the Municipal Government Act.
Okay, clerk, what is your reaction? You comfortable with that?
Comfortable with that? The thing I was looking for was the feeling of council, but I think I saw a lot of nodding heads, so I can bring that forward to the March 24th meeting. That's fine.
Did you say a lot of nodding off heads?
It
Okay.
is scintillating.
That's great fun. Okay, let's go to hydrant clearing, fire hydrant clearing. Okay, this was an item that we had on our agenda a while back, and staff were going to look at it, which they have done.
So, Mr.
Clerk,
Mayor, I guess
or-
first off, I wanted to apologize for the report being late. It was requested for the previous meeting on February 24th. Hadn't been included there. Ultimately, we have had some good conversations at the staff level about this subject, but the recommendation here is that it's difficult to do justice to consideration of hydrant clearing without broader consideration of the snow and ice control policy. So the recommendation is that council direct a report to be produced on the snow and ice control operations over this past winter, get the recommendations of our manager of public works and transportation on any revision of the snow and ice control policy, including anything with reference to hydrants at that time.
Okay. Comments or questions? Councillor Wilson. Unmute, sir.
I know, I'm
There
sorry.
we go.
I'd like to move that motion as written.
Okay. That is the motion that's in your package. Deputy Mayor seconds it. Excellent. You heard the motion. Councillor Now.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind council that those hydrants are part of our fire protection, which we are responsible for. So ultimately, it's our responsibility to see that they're cleared. I would like to see them cleared sooner than later, but you know, we do have some of the public that are out there clearing some of them, but unfortunately, it's not getting done for all of them.
And this proposal would see the policy under review through the summer and fall and in place for next winter. Yeah. So, any other comments on the motion? Motion's been moved and seconded. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. And hopefully we'll continue to remind citizens when there's an impending snowstorm, and I'm sure we're not out of it yet, that if they have a fire hydrant in their neighborhood, take a shovel over, because that seems to be working well. Okay, let's go to the last item, the video surveillance policy.
So we had recently discussion at council and at the police advisory board through to council by recommendation around the development of surveillance policy. and the clerk has done some work to review policies in other jurisdictions and provide some consideration here. Wondering, Maureen, if you would like to introduce this further?
Yes, basically with council's direction, I've done some research on existing policies that are out there, and also based on comments that council made in respect to surveillance cameras. That sort of guided the pieces that came forward. So there's a draft policy in front of council for consideration. As we just discussed with the last policy for in front of council this evening, it is our process in the town of Mahone Bay that policies come to a council meeting for information and then are come back again for consideration at the next regular meeting of council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver.
Thank you. So I was curious to know whether any other jurisdictions within Lunenburg County use video surveillance.
If I may, Your Worship.
Yes, please.
Yes, I didn't even put myself on mute, Councillor Carver. I knew that question was coming. So it is, yes, definitely. The municipality of Chester, the municipality of Lunenburg, and the town of Bridgewater all have policies of after a fashion. Bridgewater's is part really of their open smart community program pilot, however they refer to it. So it does highlight the fact that I have not eliminated the fact that or the possibility that there might be something in a different policy that references surveillance cameras in Lunenburg. On whom I'm missing. That's it. So I haven't eliminated that. Different municipalities across the province handle it a little bit differently, but yes, there are certainly some that are existing in Lunenburg County.
And do we have any information about whether or not the presence of the surveillance cameras have had an effect on the vandalism?
I'm not even sure. I looked at the policies. I didn't get into why specifically they brought them in, or I've certainly seen references to vandalism, but primarily the references I've seen have been in like an overall protection. I don't know if there was something that brought the matter forward. I'm not sure about that. So this particular matter came in front of council as part of a discussion about graffiti that was held at the police advisory board, which then came forward. But certainly we've had discussions on the staff side for a couple of years. We've had concerns raised by citizens about off-highway vehicles, specifically in Jubilee Park, but there have been other issues as well over the years with damage to scarecrows and that sort of thing.
And one more question, if I may, Your Worship.
Yes, please.
And I couldn't see a reference to whether the cameras would be fixed or movable. So in other words, situationally sighted, depending on activity, I suppose. But are they fixed or movable? Would they be?
The policy is written to be more general than that. There's nothing in here that would suggest fixed cameras. A policy that would suggest fixed cameras would usually, what I've seen, would reference something along the lines of cameras will be directed at, say, I've seen references to public works buildings, that sort of thing. So we don't have anything like that in the draft policy for council's consideration. So yeah, it's not that specific.
Thank you, Councillor Carver. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor.
So it was, I guess, upon my urging that this policy has come to the table, and for me, I guess the important piece was for council to have an opportunity to deliberate about venturing into having surveillance cameras in town, with, I guess, at the back of my mind, knowing that for me is a significant shift and shapes the culture of a town very differently. The surveillance, for me, I guess I was in shock that graffiti would lead us to a situation where we want to I guess, start surveilling residents to a certain extent. And if that's what causes it, then in many ways, I guess from my experience, having lived in places where there was very high surveillance and very high insecurity, I am not convinced about surveillance leading to safety. And especially when I think about graffiti is not necessarily a safety issue. For me, it's kids not being lacking the necessary guidance they need to have so that they can treat public equipment, public property in the manner that it needs to be treated. I know it is a problem. There probably could be other ways of addressing it before we launch into doing surveillance. Now, I know folks will have different patience around those issues and might say, well, let's do surveillance and that will solve the problem for us. I just want to caution us that that's not necessarily, maybe we'll be lucky, Mahombe will be the lucky place that will put cameras and that will sort out the graffiti issue. But for me, there's still question marks. So I want us to consider it, knowing that, from at least from my perspective, I might not support the policy, but if there's willingness across the board to support the policy, at least we'll have deliberated and figured out, is this the best way for us to do surveillance in the community? If that makes sense, yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Clerk?
I'd like to add, as part of the consideration, that there can be a tendency to assume that kids are behind vandalism and or graffiti. And I don't think that is something that we should, I think we should, as part of the discussion, I think that we should open that up to it. We can't assume that these are young people, or we can't assume who might be doing this. And again, while this issue is before us this evening because of the discussion of graffiti, as I say, there have been other issues over the years that have come forward, and frankly, especially in the last couple of years, we've had a lot of discussions at the staff level about, actually at council as well, about the possibility of getting something like trail cams to try to identify some of the people driving off highway vehicles in Jubilee Park and that sort of thing. So definitely graffiti is how this came before us this time. That was the conversation that prompted a conversation about a surveillance policy, but we've certainly had conversations at the council table before about surveillance. Thank you.
Councillor Carver and then Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. I just want to put into the mix that I'm very mixed on this issue. But I'm thinking of the example of New York City, where they had demonstrated that very rapid removal of graffiti helped to decrease the occurrence of graffiti. So in other words, not leaving it there and reinforcing the beauty around us concept by getting rid of the graffiti immediately was effective to a certain degree. I realize that places a great demand on staff time, but I think it's worth considering as we deliberate on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Carver. Councillor Burdick, and then Councillor Feeney.
Yeah, thank you. I also brought it up before with the previous discussion that we had on video cameras that would be used on the streets. So to see what was happening traffic wise. And that I mean, the question was raised here, what happens then after you know, video surveillance happens? So that's one part of the question, and that's maybe it's a rhetorical question, as well as a specific one. But also, I do wonder about you know, if municipalities and I know that we're all given different sort of rights and abilities in terms of property, but it raises to me the question about differentiation, if there is any, between private entities like a business or somebody's home and a town in terms of the legalities of keeping cameras trained out into public spaces. In this case, I guess the idea is that they're trained on town property that is also a public space. So it's a interesting question to me. To me, I totally agree, though, with the points raised by the deputy mayor and Councillor Carver about what happens at that point. Like, does this actually, is it proven effective as a mode of, is it a preventive, or is it something that is also then eventually sort of absorbed into daily life, or yeah, just the efficacy of it overall, worth the versus the cost of it and ethical questions related to it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Feeney, you had a comment, I think?
I'll just be brief, Mayor. You know, I just look back at how this conversation has evolved. I think this topic started at the Police Advisory Board. There was some conversation around challenges on enforcement, and I'm just taking my notes from the minutes of those discussions, and then out of that spilled into a policy around surveillance. And of course, as I mentioned the last time we had this conversation, I mean, it's been my history in the context of working for a telecommunications company where the RCMP wanted to own assets, i.e. cameras, that they would bolt onto the side of corporate-owned telephone poles and have an internet connection so that they could surveil using a camera, 100% surveillance with a server in the background that records everything that the video camera picks up for 48 hours, 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. And all of that would be part of the investigative toolbox that the RCMP, under their mandate of law enforcement, would be able to utilize. So that isn't something that I think I'm ready to support. My understanding in our last conversation was that this was more in the lines of, hey, if the RCMP wanted to put up some temporary movable, to Councillor Carver's point, movable cameras in an effort to capture repeat offender who's you know, in the midst of ongoing vandalism in an ongoing pattern that can be identified, that what would be the mechanism where the RCMP could gain access to town property to put up a temporary movable camera. So I think from permanent internet connected surveillance to temporary movable short-term camera moving around based on a pattern of any kind of illegal pattern that the police were interested in. I think those are very different things. And I just don't know which side of the spectrum this policy is trying to address. If it's the former, boy, I don't think any of us really feel comfortable about having a 24/7 surveillance with a video camera recording the license plate of every car driving down Main Street. But if it's as I drove up the road by the cemetery in Lunenburg today, I noticed there was quite a bit of vandalism that's happened in the last week, and quite a few tombstones that have been knocked over along that road. So in the context of a short-term police effort to try to track down a chronic vandal, then if somebody wanted to hook a short-term camera up on the side of the swimming pool chain link fence, like, okay, I can get my head around that. But I think we're all using analogies, and I'm not quite sure, to the deputy mayor's point, what are we really signing up for? And it's not clear to me what we really are signing up for yet. So I think over the next couple, so this is coming back to council on the 24th, Mo? Okay, so hopefully that will be clear by the time council needs to make a decision on the 24th. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Feeney. Clerk?
So to Councillor Feeney's question, he gave a couple of RCMP related scenarios and asked, where does this policy come down? And it's actually further down from either one of those. The RCMP have the ability under their own jurisdiction to surveil,
Whatever.
I'm not up to date on all that. I don't have a legal degree. So that's really, they have certainly their own opportunities and abilities under that. This policy is really something along the lines of, for instance, in the report, there's a picture of the graffiti on the new generator going into the new fire hall. So this is actually much worse since then. As to Councillor Carver's point, our staff have been trying very hard. Any of you who know our public works staff could probably pick out which two in particular are really taking this to heart. They don't like to see things in a mess, and they've been going out and they've been trying, but they just can't keep up with it. So this is more along the lines of, would staff put up a camera in an area to see if they can find who is, if there's a case that, an area that they want to say, what's going on here? Is this, can we see what's happening to this particular spot? So it's even a little further down from what you were talking about, Councillor Feeney. It is, if you recall, a few years ago, there were some problems with break-ins in businesses, and the RCMP went around and they spoke to businesses who had cameras up in their own parking lots and that sort of thing. This is what we're talking about, that same sort of thing. Just like any one of us may have a camera on our garage door or something like that. We're way down from what you were talking about, Councillor Feeney.
I had one, but somebody stole it.
The raccoon camera, Maureen.
Well, my understanding is you said about the graffiti at the new fire hall. I believe there are cameras being put on the outside of the new fire hall. I think there's 4, maybe 5 of them going on the outside, and there's some on the inside. So, I'm not sure what they will capture, but I know there are cameras going up on the new fire hall.
And just as an aside, at the Mahone Bay Civic Marina, we had 5 cameras that were running 24/7, and all 5 cameras were being recorded. That was 10 years ago. And while we were not able to directly see somebody committing a crime, we were able to arrange for the arrest of a couple of gentlemen who had a real little business on stealing oat boards and then selling them out of the back of their van. And it was the cameras that enabled us to see how they were making it happen at the wharf. So in that particular case, it did prove useful. There were signs up saying that you're on video. Anybody that came on the wharf was aware of it, but it turned to be a useful tool. Anyway, so we're going to defer this until the next meeting. Counsel? Deputy Mayor?
I'm thinking it's the natural flow of what the policy is all about, right? So it's in the public domain. The public can get to comment and see if there's something that they want the town to adopt. So it will give us another 2 weeks before we come back to it, right? So I think that's a good place to be.
Okay. Done. Then we will move on to item number 7, Deputy Mayor, council support for the Ukraine on social media.
Yeah, so I asked for it to be put on the agenda because we had a conversation about the potential for council to support or show some support to Ukraine through either having a flag or social media, and I suggested that since we have the flag and proclamation policy on the docket, to have a conversation about it, so that we can see whether we want to change that. Maybe just a social media post would help us be able to provide, I guess, acknowledgement of support towards Ukraine, a workaround, and basically provide us with a workaround on our policy and our policy impasse, whether we want to do proclamation. So I still think that's something we might want to consider. Shouldn't be too much heavy lifting. We can do a simple post if we can all agree to that. But I also put it on the agenda to raise something, I guess, to your attention if you haven't thought about it from the perspective that I'll mention, is that it's quite interesting that since there's war in Ukraine, there's a lot of concern around the world because it's Ukraine. Yet there was war in Syria. I don't believe there was a mention that we should do the same. And this is not just town of Mahone Bay, but it's in many ways all over the Western world. And I guess as individuals that I have influence with, I would want to sort of mention, just have a reflection about how when we do these kinds of things, well, there's a message it passes across to those who were in similar problems in the past that we never acknowledged, that we never mentioned, and probably maybe we can do better going forward, that when such like things happen, even in places that we haven't heard about, but it's still a war, young kids are still dying, families are being displaced, that we also show the same amount of concern, because a human life is a human life. And I think as a person of color, one of the strangest pieces, seeing people who look like me actually being prevented from leaving a country that is at war just because they are not the kind of people that we need to be acknowledging or be concerned about. And so those are things that also we need as people in leadership positions, that we need to raise awareness about and support in some way, shape, or form. So I thought I would mention those things. So I do definitely support for us to put the flag up, but also be mindful of the inaction in other areas, and maybe figure out, is there something we can do to remedy that going forward? Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Burdick.
I agree on all of those points. This is again where I think where we've stopped short at different times, and I don't really know the history of the town of Mahone Bay in terms of social media posts in general over the past, say, 10 years in regards to wars outside of Canada, which are generally where it's happening. But I haven't, so I can't really speak to that exactly. But I think this again raises the question of showing support or making a statement of some sort on social media, which to me is, it is a very, it would seem to be a simple point, especially on things that we generally agree with to as a council. There aren't many of us on council. So, you know, I don't see the problem at all with having a simple statement of support for Ukraine. It's a really big war, you know, and it's affecting a lot of people of color, people of no color, Jews, Roma.
People with gas tanks in their cars.
Yeah, you know, it has there's a lot of impact that is everywhere, and I think, of course, we've had lots of people who have come to Canada over the past many years. There's been a sort of the refugee programs have varied over the years, we'll say. If we go back to also including the Second World War, it wasn't always consistent back then. So I think that we can make a general statement of support. I totally agree with that. I think that if we can agree that a statement does not have to be seen as a proclamation in the sense of, you know, we're not going to be going to Ukraine and joining, you know, and fighting on the lines there, but we are saying, hey, yeah, this is a really bad situation, and people who are studying in Ukraine, we're thinking about them, as well as people who are displaced in various ways in Ukraine, etc. It shouldn't necessarily be a complicated question. So I guess at each time that this happens, we can say, and I'm not going to revisit this in full now because we'll be talking about it later in the month. But for example, if it's like, hey, there's been a lot of hate symbols around and it's affecting people's life, mental health, actual physical safety across this country, then maybe we can make a simple statement saying, you know, we're not into that. we agree that hate symbols are a problem. We agree that hate speech is a problem. We agree that, you know, some basic things are things that we agree on morally. So this would be one of those examples.
Thank you, Councillor Burdick. Anyone else have a comment? Councillor Feeney.
If Mayor, if I understand, the Deputy Mayor did make a motion to place a social media post speaking to the town's support for the people of Ukraine, and if he could say it much more eloquently than I could, but I certainly can second that motion if he's prepared to make it.
Just like you said it. You said it well.
Okay.
You didn't catch that?
Clerk, would you repeat the motion, please, Deputy Mayor?
Well, I'd like to move that council ask staff to post on our social media page a message in support of the people of Ukraine in this terrible time of war.
A message?
A message of support.
A worded message, not
Yes.
like the Ukrainian flag or as a symbol of.
Well, do I need to be that specific? I'm assuming it'll have a flag. Yeah.
It's your motion.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Let's go to committee reports, section 8, policy and strategy committee meeting of the 28th of February. And there are a gaggle of motions in there, a number of different issues that are recommended to council. 6, I think, 6 motions. Boom. Councillor Carver, you made the first motion.
Yes, and I had a question about it, actually, about the recording of the motion.
The wording of it?
The wording of it. I had thought that there was, that the first part of it was more specific than just to proceed with the transportation project in the 2021-22 budget. The latter part is right, the inclusion of the 3-way stop at Pleasant, but I was sort of echoing the wording of Mr. Hyde in that meeting, but I made that motion. So I just have that recollection. I thought it was more specific, but if it wasn't, and if this says what it means to say, and if staff understand that that's what it says, then fine, I'll make the motion here.
Thank you. We get a seconder for the motion, and then we'll talk to Mr. Hyde. Deputy Mayor seconds it. Mr. Hyde, your comment, please.
Councillor Carver, it might be that I had specified out the components of the current year transportation project, and when Mo and I were looking at the minutes of the meeting, I looked at the way that it was referenced in the budget, the way that that project was approved, because the reason it's in this motion is to include Pleasant Street within the budget of the current project, because we had unspent funds within that project budget. So I in the end, I do think I probably, when we talked about it at the meeting, listed out components of the project, and then in the motion did not do that. And we could do that. So that's things like the 3-way stop that has already taken place at Clearway in Maine, but also things to come like Ketty's Landing and Long Hill Road. And I think we had listed Ketty's Landing and Long Hill Road as part of that project that was still to come in the coming year. So, you know, that could be inserted to say, proceed with the transportation project in the 2021-22 budget, including components such as the Ketty's crossing and Long Hill Road crossing, as well as the Pleasant Street. So, you know, you could add it in there. But I think that's where the discussion was, and what I omitted from the minutes in discussion with Mo when we were putting the minutes together.
Thank you. That helps, and I'm hoping that the clerk got the rephrasing, which.
Well, notwithstanding the 3-way stop at Pleasant and Maine, the other items that you just mentioned, CAO, are in that transportation project report for 2021-22.
They are in the project, but if Councillor Carver, if you wanted to just, and I'll repeat it again for Mo, to tweak the motion and say that council directs staff to proceed with the transportation project in the 2021-22 budget, and then you could add a dash, including the Ketty's Landing and Long Hill Road crossings, and then end that dash and come out with, along with the inclusion of the 3-way stop at Pleasant Street at Main Street. I think that works as a sentence. If it doesn't work as a sentence, when we look at the draft, I'm sure it's a small grammatical correction.
Works for me.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, you have a comment?
As a second, I have a problem with that, in the sense that my understanding was that those 2 other pieces, they're already on the go. In fact, we don't even need to refer to them because they're already happening. And this motion was to ensure that this new piece was being added to that. And so in many ways, bringing those on for me doesn't make sense. So I think it's the addition of that Pleasant Street piece that we really wanted to make sure that it's captured, and hence the motion, right?
Okay, I'm taking that in. That works. So I will repeat the motion that council directs staff to proceed with the transportation project in the 2021-22 budget with the inclusion of the three-way stop at Pleasant Street and Main Street.
And that's what you're seconding, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay. You've heard the motion. Any comments on the question? Councillor Wilson.
I think everyone received a short memo I wrote today about the three-way stop at Pleasant Street. I'm not a traffic engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a bit concerned about having a three-way stop at a place where you also have a lot of people turning left to go into a parking lot of the grocery store, a crosswalk, and also an exit from the same grocery store. And my suspicion is that this would be a solution that would create even greater problems than what we have now. Right now, the real problem seems to me to be line of sight for people coming down Pleasant Street who want to turn left and can't see down past the bank because there's a shrub in the way, there's a sign in the way, and there's cars allowed to park almost all the way up to that corner. So I would suggest if we just simply made it no parking from the corner to the bank and snuck up some night and cut down that shrub, we'd go a long way to solving the problem.
Thank you, Robin Hood Wilson. Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. Yeah, the other part of the equation, I think, is also pedestrians and shops on both sides, and the movement of people who aren't in cars. And I think that's part of all of these considerations too. So clearing some things there and not having parking doesn't necessarily address that aspect of it too, because I know, well, I know people, I am people who've walked across the crosswalk with kids when they were younger, and at some close calls. I've heard that from other people also. And it would just help control that too. There's a sort of mental connection that people make when they actually have to stop.
Councillor Feeney.
Just a question for the CAO. Was, just to refresh my memory, Dylan, was a three-way stop at Pleasant a recommendation within the CBCL report? The often referred to, much maligned CBCL report. But is that particular item, was that a subset? And if you don't know, that's okay. It's been a couple years since we read it. I'm just curious if
my recollection is that it was included there.
It was. Mm-hmm.
I believe it was, yeah. But they didn't do anything except the very most preliminary engineering. So what we'll do first off with this, if this motion passes, is get some engineering expertise with respect to the configuration intersection, as we did with Clearway in Maine when we were reconfiguring that. And even more so than Clearway in Maine, this one has an intervening driveway that'll be a challenge with the former Bill Store, Mahone Bay Shoe Company driveway that comes out on the intersection. So I'll be curious to see what the recommendations from engineers will be in that regard. But you got to start somewhere with council's direction to move on this.
So Mayor, just to clarify, Councillor Carver's motion will put the wheels in motion to get the right people to review it, in the traffic authority and the engineers, and they will come back with a some kind of a declaration about whether this can be done, and that will come back to council at a later date with backstopped by the experts that yes, you can do a three-way stop here, and here's how you do it, or no, you can't if you can't.
Okay.
Is that Is that fair? Is
So
that
could I just-
correct?
If I can clarify the understanding,
Okay.
Joe. So if we can do it, we've been directed to do it. So we would update council. We wouldn't be asking for any further direction. If we can't do it, then we'll come back to council and have to explain that.
Okay.
And, you know, I think at the end of the day, when you talk about can't do it, it already is configured in a way that is problematic. So it may be that what we can do is not exactly what was planned, but, you know, we'll have to look at a way to reconfigure it to at least improve safety. So yes, we'll be, if we can't pull off what's been authorized, we'll come back with a specific recommendation. Otherwise, we'll just update council on the intended configuration that is recommended if this passes.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
Well, I think the comment I wanted to make is just following up on conversations we were having yesterday with the chamber. I think prioritizing pedestrian traffic is critical for us, and so even as you go through and look at what can be done, I would say that as council, we should not be driven by slowing down traffic. For me, it is okay if we increase safety. And if it forces people to not use their cars and walk, I think I'm okay with traffic being slower in Mahone Bay. Yes, it might create a few challenges, but I think we can work around them. I've seen stops that have been put in similar positions before in other places and they've worked. So I think what should drive us is figuring out why are we doing this move? It's to increase safety and from my perspective to calm traffic. And so if that works, I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay. You've heard the motion. Lots of discussion on the question. As the CAO has suggested, this motion will cause the traffic engineers, the authorities, the experts to look at the proposal and advise us whether or not it is something that is doable, something that they would recommend as traffic specialists. On the motion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Council refer discussion of a request for proposals for engineering services in relation to the intersection of Maine and Edgewater Streets to the 2022-23 budget process. That's the motion.
So moved.
Councillor Carver moves. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. On the motion. On the question. All in favor? The motion is carried. The third one, council direct staff to initiate discussions with Nova Scotia Liquor Commission concerning potential cyclist and pedestrian safety improvements through their property on Main Street. Councillor Feeney.
So moved.
So moved. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? The motion's carried. The next one, that council directs staff to forward the letter from Ms. Carrigan to RPS and the appropriate contacts within the Department of the Environment and request a response from the Department of the Environment regarding the environmental concerns that have been raised, and then advise Ms. Carrigan of the direction of council. The deputy mayor moves it. Councillor Carver seconds it. Good-o. Councillor Now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, should we request a response on that from RPS also, see what their position is on it?
I would expect that they have a canned, not a canned response, but they would give us a response. But it would be their corporate response. I'm sure it would be enlightening. We can ask them for one, we can ask them for their opinion. But I think we need to make sure that they're aware that we're going to the Department of the Environment as well for their opinion. Okay, so Deputy Mayor, we would amend that to send that note as well to our PS.
So I think we had a very long conversation about this at policy and strategy, and I'd like to keep the motion as we had agreed, so that we don't go around again the same kind of conversation. If that's okay, I think with my seconder.
Seconder, Carver. Okay, so we'll have a vote on that motion and we'll see what happens to it. On the motion, on the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to that the committee refer the issue of compost contamination and bylaw amendments to council and recommend that council direct staff to prepare a report and a draft amended solid waste bylaw for the review of council. Councillor Carver, have your hand up.
I do, and it's just simply to note that in the minutes it says a motion by Councillor Feeney, seconded by Councillor Feeney.
He gets around, you know.
There we go.
Okay, all right. So who would make that motion? Councillor
Make it twice.
Feeney.
I'll even make it twice, Mayor, if I was allowed.
Who
This is
would
a good
second
one.
the motion? Councillor Wilson seconds. Duly moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. And let's go to the final piece. Will I move my screen a little bit here? That the next agenda of the Policy and Strategy Committee include the proclamation policy, the timing of closed sessions of council, and the flag policy. Who would make that motion? Councillor Feeney, seconded by Councillor Carver. Okay, you've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried as well. Thank you. Nothing else arising from the policy and strategy. And finally, the Electric Utility Resources Sharing Advisory Board. Mr. Hyde, you're going to have to help us with this, or Councillor Carver, did you have a question?
I do have a question. It was just about the acronym SSAC. What does SSAC stand for?
That would stand for the so it's just in the title that the mayor just gave. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a moment here trying to bring it up on my screen. Shared Service Advisory Committee. That's what it was, right?
Oh, Shared Services Advisory Committee.
Advisory Committee. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And just as far as introducing this, minutes, we'll see these minutes more regularly. We haven't seen them in a little while. This committee had not met for 2 years following the onset of COVID pandemic regulations. Our last meeting was in March of 2020. So almost fully 2 years to the day, but we will be continuing to meet regularly from here. So there will be additional minutes included for council's consideration. So these look new, but it's just something you'll get used to having on our agendas. And if anyone has any questions about the actual contents of the minutes, I can certainly answer them, but this was really a preliminary meeting to establish what the committee would be working on and how it would be structured from here.
See, Councillor Wilson is the chair of the group. Okay. Anything for this one? Okay. That concludes the regular agenda for tonight's meeting. Clerk, do we have anyone watching that may have a question?
You have people watching now, and we also have, I don't know, it's a couple of questions, it's all in one. So I'll read the question all as one. Will studies pertaining to the old fire station include environmental studies such as lead and asbestos testing of the existing building materials to prevent costly surprises that could cause future projects to run grossly over budget, like the town hall renovation?
CAO, would you expect that to be typically part of a contract to assess the viability of that structure?
Certainly those things will be flagged by any company that's performing that analysis for us. Wouldn't necessarily say that the cost that was discussed is inclusive of any testing that might be recommended, but certainly we would get those recommendations and be in a position to act on them.
Okay. Anything else, Clerk?
Nope, that's everything, Your Worship.
How many people do we have watching us?
Right now, there's 7.
Good. Magnificent 7. Excellent. Well, I would thank those 7 people for staying with us for the last 2 hours and 22 minutes, and invite them back to our next meeting of council. And we would now entertain a motion to go in camera under 22(2)E of the MGA to discuss contract negotiations. Councillor Wilson moves. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now, all in favor? The motion in camera to go in camera is passed. And as we do that, Clerk, we'll say goodnight to our friends at home. And we'll take a 5-minute break. It's 9:22. We'll go again at 9:20.